Millions of fans watched the San Francisco 49ers win 4 Super Bowls in the 1980s, built by a coach nicknamed the Genius, who reinvented how football was played and coached. The West Coast offense he built is still run, in some form, on nearly every NFL sideline today. But genius has never been free in this sport. ALS, concussions that end careers mid-sentence. A finger amputated on purpose just to keep playing. This is where the 49ers' 1980s dynasty really ended up. One is the head coach whose soft-spoken perfectionism turned a 2-14 team into the most successful franchise of the decade, and whose family had already been touched by the same disease that would eventually take him too. Bill Walsh became the 49ers head coach in 1979 after the team's second consecutive 2-14 season, and within 3 years, using a passing scheme built on short, precise routes that the football world came to call the West Coast offense, he had turned San Francisco into champions. Born in Los Angeles in 1931, Walsh developed his system as an assistant under Paul Brown in Cincinnati, and a stint with the Oakland Raiders in Stanford before San Francisco hired him at age 47, doubting even then whether he could turn around a franchise that had gone winless in his very first season. He went on to win 3 Super Bowls in 10 seasons, discover both Joe Montana in the 3rd round and Jerry Rice out of tiny Mississippi Valley State, and build a coaching tree that would eventually run more than half the head coaching jobs in the league, with disciples like Mike Holmgren and George Seifert carrying his system forward for decades. Colleagues called him the Genius, a nickname Walsh reportedly found uncomfortable, and players like linebacker Keena Turner remembered him simply as a perfectionist who scripted the first 15 plays of every single game, a practice now standard across the entire NFL. In 2002, Walsh's son Steve, a former ABC News reporter, died of leukemia at age 46. 2 years later, Walsh himself was diagnosed with the same disease. He kept the diagnosis largely private, disclosing it publicly only in November of 2006, after months of treatment and blood transfusions. Bill Walsh died at his home in Woodside, California, on July 30, 2007, at age 75. The 49ers renamed the Candlestick Park playing field in his honor, and the following year's Super Bowl was dedicated to his memory, with his son Craig joined by Ronnie Lott, Jerry Rice, and Steve Young for the ceremonial coin toss. Walsh built the offensive blueprint the modern NFL still runs today. Bill Walsh outlived his own son by only 5 years, both of them eventually claimed by the exact same disease neither one of them ever asked for. 2 is the receiver remembered forever for one single catch, and whose final years turned that same fame into a very public lesson in a disease with no cure. Dwight Clark was a 10th-round afterthought out of Clemson in 1979, invited to a 49ers workout almost by accident when Bill Walsh called looking for a different player entirely, quarterback Steve Fuller, and Clark happened to answer the phone and tag along to catch passes instead. He made the team anyway, reportedly leaving his own playbook out on his bed every night in case he got cut, and on January 10, 1982, in the NFC Championship game against Dallas, Clark leaped into the back of the end zone to haul in a fingertip touchdown from Joe Montana on a play called Sprint Right Option that became known simply as the catch, the single moment credited with launching San Francisco's entire dynasty and ending the Dallas Cowboys' own run atop the NFC. Clark played 9 seasons, caught 506 passes, won 2 Super Bowls, and stayed with the organization for decades afterward, eventually rising to general manager and later serving as director of football operations for the reconstituted Cleveland Browns. In March of 2017, Clark announced he had been diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, the same disease known as Lou Gehrig's disease. He and his wife Kelly relocated to Whitefish, Montana, to be closer to former owner Eddie DeBartolo Jr., who flew dozens of former teammates out to visit him as the disease progressed, including a group visit to Clark's ranch, where former running back Roger Craig later said he nearly fainted from emotion just hearing the news of his passing months afterward. In October of 2017, the 49ers held Dwight Clark Day at Levi's Stadium, where Clark addressed the crowd, ownership, and more than 40 former teammates from a suite in a weakened voice, calling the disease a little thing he was dealing with and saying he simply wanted one more chance to see the men he'd played alongside. Dwight Clark died at his Montana home on June 4, 2018, at age 61, just over a year after his diagnosis, with his wife saying he passed peacefully surrounded by the people he loved most. The catch is still replayed every time this franchise's history gets told. Dwight Clark spent the year after his diagnosis doing the one thing ALS couldn't take right away, smiling for every teammate who flew out to see him one more time. If Clark's story is the one that got you, tell me in the comments which member of this dynasty hit you hardest, because the next three names on this list are all still alive today, and each one paid a different kind of price to get there. 3 is the quarterback who won 4 Super Bowls and then spent the following 3 decades discovering exactly what the sport had actually cost him. Joe Montana, nicknamed Joe Cool for his unshakable calm in the biggest moments, led the 49ers to 4 championships across 14 seasons, throwing the winning pass on the catch and orchestrating one of the most famous game-winning drives in Super Bowl history against Cincinnati in 1989. Born in New Eagle, Pennsylvania in 1956 and a national champion at Notre Dame, Montana was a third-round pick many teams passed on before Walsh built an entire offense around him. A brutal hit in the 1990 NFC Championship game effectively ended his 49ers career, and San Francisco traded him to Kansas City in 1993, where he played 2 more seasons before retiring in 1994. In the decades since, Montana has said the physical bill arrived almost entirely after his career ended. At least 3 neck fusions with a 4th still possible, roughly half a dozen knee surgeries that never fully repaired the joint, permanent nerve damage down his left foot from a back surgery that damaged his sciatic nerve, arthritis so severe in his hands that he says they ache uncontrollably at night, and an elbow replacement on top of everything else. He is alive today, in his late 60s, still active in business and broadcasting, but has said plainly that he can no longer ski, play basketball, or do most of the physical activities he once shared with his own children. Joe Cool authored some of the calmest, most surgical performances in Super Bowl history. Joe Montana spent the 30 years after his last championship discovering that the bill for that calm arrived quietly, one surgery at a time, long after the cameras had stopped rolling. 4 is the safety who became a legend for a decision most people can barely process, choosing to have part of his own finger amputated rather than miss a single football game. Ronnie Lott anchored San Francisco's secondary for 10 seasons, helping the 49ers win 4 Super Bowls in the 1980s and building a reputation as one of the hardest, most fearless tacklers the position has ever seen. Born in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1959, Lott was an 8th overall pick out of USC in 1981, and after crushing the tip of his left pinky finger, tackling a Dallas running back in the final game of the 1985 season, doctors gave him a choice: 8 weeks of recovery from reconstructive surgery or immediate amputation of the fingertip so he could keep playing in the postseason. Lott chose amputation. He later admitted the decision shook him far more than the legend suggests, telling reporters he felt sick and broke into a cold sweat the first time he saw what was left of his own finger, and that he regretted not simply taking the surgery instead. He played 9 more seasons after that choice, won 2 more Super Bowls, and was elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility in 2000. After football, Lott built one of the most successful post-career business portfolios of any player on this list, founding a private equity firm with former teammates that has managed billions of dollars, and establishing the Lott Impact Trophy, honoring college football's top defensive player. He is alive today, in his mid-60s, a Bay Area businessman as respected in boardrooms, now as he once was on a football field. Ronnie Lott turned a piece of his own body into a metaphor for exactly how far this era of the 49ers was willing to go. Ronnie Lott has spent the 3 decades since building the kind of quiet, considerable success that the finger he lost never once slowed down. If you've made it this far, hit subscribe, because the last 2 names on this list represent the 2 opposite endings this entire era could have handed down. 5 is the quarterback who spent years living in Joe Montana's shadow before a single hit ended his career in an instant, and who has spent every year since trying to make sure no other quarterback has to learn what he learned the hard way. Steve Young took over as San Francisco's starter once Montana was traded to Kansas City in 1993, won back-to-back NFL MVP awards, and threw a Super Bowl record 6 touchdown passes in San Francisco's 49-26 win over San Diego in Super Bowl 29, finally stepping fully out from under his predecessor's shadow. Born in Salt Lake City in 1961, Young starred at BYU before a rocky start in Tampa Bay led to his trade to San Francisco, where he eventually became the highest-rated passer in NFL history at the time of his retirement. On September 27, 1999, Young suffered his 7th documented concussion in a game against the Arizona Cardinals, lying motionless on the field before eventually walking off under his own power. It was the last play of his career. He announced his retirement the following June, citing the cumulative toll of those head injuries. In the years since, Young has become one of the most outspoken former players on the subject of brain health, appearing in PBS's League of Denial documentary on the NFL's concussion crisis, and later joining a brain health technology company as an advisor, saying he wished he had access in 1999 to tools that could have let him make his own informed decision about when to stop playing. He is alive today, in his mid-60s, a respected broadcaster and businessman who has never stopped talking publicly about what those 7 concussions actually meant. Young finally won his own championship only after years of being measured against a legend. Steve Young's career ended on a single play in 1999, and he has spent every year since trying to make sure the next generation of quarterbacks gets to make that same decision with better information than he had. 6 is the receiver whose statistical dominance has never been matched, and who somehow became the rare 49er on this list to walk away from the violence of the sport with his body largely intact. Jerry Rice caught more passes, gained more receiving yards, and scored more touchdowns than any receiver in NFL history, a Bill Walsh discovery out of tiny Mississippi Valley State, who anchored San Francisco's offense for 16 seasons and won 3 Super Bowls. Born in Starkville, Mississippi in 1962, Rice built a legendary off-season training regimen that other players openly feared joining, running hills that reportedly broke grown men who tried to keep up with him, a work ethic he has credited directly for both his NFL longevity and a fitness routine he has maintained well into his 60s. He retired in 2004, having missed remarkably few games across 2 decades of play, and unlike so many of his own teammates, avoided the string of major joint replacements and neurological diagnoses that define so much of this dynasty's aftermath. He remains active today doing daily workouts, walks, and cross-training routines, appears regularly on sports broadcasts, and has built an estimated fortune well into 8 figures through business ventures and endorsements alongside his wife Letitia. Rice is alive today, in his early 60s, still visibly the same relentless competitor who once outtrained an entire locker room. Jerry Rice built his legend by refusing to ever stop moving. Jerry Rice may be the one player from this entire dynasty who never had to learn what all his teammates eventually did, that the bill for football usually comes due exactly when a man finally slows down. They rest now in a Woodside, California home taken by the same disease that had already claimed his own son, and in a Montana ranch where former teammates flew in just to watch him smile one more time. 3 are still alive today, one nursing a body full of hardware and scar tissue, held together by surgeries he never expected to need, one advocating for the brains of the players who came after him, and one still outrunning the same bill everyone else on this roster eventually had to pay. The West Coast offense changed football forever, and the men who ran it first are still, decades later, showing the rest of the league exactly what that change was worth, on the field and off it.